After I finished Hunger of Memory, The Education of Richard Rodriguez, the memoir by Richard Rodriguez, I went on Goodreads out of curiosity to see how the book had been rated. Turns out that the top review, first of all, has an average of a 3.33 rating. And the top comment is written, and the most liked comment, is written by a guy who starts out by saying, I give this book high marks for its prose style. Okay? And it's true. Okay? Hunger of Memory bills itself, the author himself bills the book as an intellectual autobiography that's necessarily political. Okay? So you read that and you immediately think that the prose is going to be cumbersome, that it's going to be overwrought, there's going to be a lot of excess. You certainly don't expect that it's going to be distilled down, a paragon of English prose, and it is. The book sings. The prose sings. It starts out, the first 3 lines of the book, he writes, I have taken Caliban's advice. I have stolen their books. I will have some run of this isle. Caliban is a character from Shakespeare's The Tempest, right? He incorporates, in many ways, Shakespearean language into the first 3 lines and makes it modern, okay? Believe me, the book is beautiful to the ear. It's a pleasure to read it. So this reviewer says, he gives it high marks for the style, but then he drops the grade to 3 stars because of what he says, the diminishing relevance of bilingual education and affirmative action. Diminishing relevance? What America does this reviewer live in? And what America do the people who like this review live in? I mean, Richard Rodriguez, in this book, which was written in 1982, talks about how people, even at that time, they romanticized their victimization. That's exactly what's happening in the United States today. The book is prescient. It saw ahead what was going to happen. The diminishing importance or the diminishing relevance of these things, nothing could be more relevant in America today than the idea of affirmative action or of bilingual education. Nothing could be more relevant. Both are issues that have not yet been honestly confronted or effectively implemented. In many ways, that's what Richard Rodriguez's book, or that's the great service, intellectual service, that Richard Rodriguez's book gives us. If you look on Wikipedia, if you look even on the book jacket copy of my edition, it's the Bantam edition, the Random House edition, I think Wikipedia says he takes a strong stand against affirmative action in bilingual education. And on the book jacket copy, it says provocative in his arguments against affirmative action in bilingual education. I do not like the wording in either one of those cases. I think it makes it very easy for the casual thinker to dismiss a really, really subtle and precise thinker like Richard Rodriguez. I would say that he takes a subtle stand against affirmative action in bilingual education. I would say he questions the arguments for affirmative action in bilingual education. I mean, you gotta read this guy. You can't dismiss him for these things. You know, more than a conservative, Richard Rodriguez is kind of a realist, I would say. All right? You know, there is that cliche that conservatives are realists, and liberals are dreamers. I would say that Richard Rodriguez is more of an iconoclast. I love iconoclasts. And, you know, perhaps that's what he's most known for, is the stands that he took. He rejected or he protested against academia. He rejected the term minority student. He grew up in a Mexican family. His first language was Spanish. And he was glad that English, I guess, was in a way imposed upon him. A certain type of correct, conventional English, which allowed him to triumph in middle-class American life. And he did triumph in middle-class American life. Not only did he write this book, Hunger of Memory, but he also wrote a trilogy of memoirs. The second one is Days of Obligation, An Argument with My Mexican Father. That's where he comes out as gay. So the first memoir, Hunger of Memory, was written in 1982. Then Days of Obligation was written in 1992. And then in 2002, he wrote the third installment called Brown, The Last Discovery of America. And then I think in 2013, he wrote Darling, a spiritual autobiography. So he triumphed as a writer. He was also a contributing editor at Harper's and at the Los Angeles Times. Okay, I think many people consider Hunger of Memory, at least, to be an American classic, and I agree. But also, he triumphed on television. Okay, he was, I think it was called the Richard Rodriguez Essays on American Life, and they would appear on the Jim Lehrer NewsHour on PBS, and he would, in many ways, espouse his polemical, controversial views on PBS, which is notoriously liberal. I mean, it helped, of course, that he was brown, saying these things that he was saying, focusing more on class than race. For example, class being the main reason for people being poorly schooled and disadvantaged more than race, although we'll get to that. So yes, he triumphed with what he calls the strange tools, okay? Their books, okay? I have stolen their books. Strange Tools comes from an author in a book he references quite a lot in Hunger of Memory called The Uses of Memory by Richard Hoggart. Richard Hoggart focused on the scholarship boy, about how when he would bring home these books that his family and his friends would look suspiciously at these strange tools, wonder what they're for. Okay? Richard Rodriguez used these strange tools to triumph in American life. And that's why, because he received those strange tools early, it's why he doesn't consider himself culturally disadvantaged, let's say, or didn't consider himself culturally disadvantaged, and why, like I said, he rejected that term minority student, and in many ways rejected the benefits that he got from affirmative action. Let me just get right to the chase here, or cut right to the chase here, to try to describe what Richard Rodriguez's subtle stance against affirmative action and bilingual education. Like I say, he distinguishes, I would say, between being culturally disadvantaged in America and racially disadvantaged in America. He does, however, acknowledge that that too many of the culturally disadvantaged are black and brown peoples. He acknowledges that, okay? But he also says that not all of the culturally disadvantaged in America are black and brown, and that affirmative action doesn't distinguish between the culturally disadvantaged and the color of a student's skin, so that ultimately affirmative action will overlook the culturally disadvantaged, whether they be black, Hispanic, or white, in favor of the culturally advantaged in many ways, the well-schooled black and Hispanic, okay? And that they, like he did, reap the benefits that should be reserved for others, okay? The truly culturally disadvantaged, whether they be black, Hispanic, white, or any other race, okay? And he makes a point that if affirmative action is to work, it has to occur in early education. That in early education is when a specific language of discourse, a unifying language of discourse, should be imposed on everyone. And that language should be English. He doesn't have a problem with a second language being taught in schools for everyone, okay? But he is a proponent of there being one unifying language which he thinks should be correct standard English, because this is what needs to be mastered if someone who is culturally disadvantaged is to become culturally advantaged. He talks about how good schooling requires that every child alter early childhood habits. And he wonders if any child can really use the language of their family in the classroom, in a learning environment. And maybe, you could make an argument and say, certain, maybe in aristocratic England, okay, where parents would speak to their kids like Oxford Dons, okay? Well, maybe in that case, children could use their parents' language in schools, but they couldn't use the language of the sort of servant class who would take care of them. They couldn't use that language in schools, okay? So the idea of imposing as gently as possible a language of intellectual discourse on children at an early age, that's where he feels as though affirmative action maybe should take place, okay? And that part of affirmative action is not allowing for bilingual education to come in as a kind of crutch, or maybe a specific English dialect as a crutch to children to make the transition easier. And that's where I say he's a realist. Okay? He says that ultimately there's going to be a difficult transition for any child, okay, who has to make or has to become deft in those strange tools. That's where he's a realist. And that's where he's thankful about the fact that that was imposed on him in the Christian Brothers school that I think he went to in Sacramento, California. Okay? So, but the book is more than this. He also talks about how he, in many ways, betrayed his parents by putting their private conversations into his books, and that he kind of made, in a way, ugly use of his private life to triumph publicly. Again, he puts himself out there. He doesn't candy coat himself in any ways. He is not afraid to make himself look even cruel and cowardly. Also, he's very, very articulate about the Catholic Church. I grew up in a Catholic home, and I can relate to a lot of the things that he says about how, the Catholic Church gave all classes access to the transcendence, cultural transcendence, and also spiritual transcendence through art and architecture and language and the Gospels in many ways, one of the great books. However, it did not, or it discouraged people who had minds of their own, who thought on their own. He again is straightforward about that. He talks about how the Latin Mass, he's nostalgic about that. Again, there is a kind of aspect to him, a kind of Sebastian Flight aspect to him, who was the character in Evil in Law's great novel, Brideshead Revisited, who talked about, the beauty of the Catholic liturgy. I sometimes question whether or not Richard Rodriguez is a proponent of liturgy in Catholicism for its aesthetic appeal, not for what it really offers to the lower disadvantaged classes. Also, he talks about how, the sisters and brothers made his success their ambition. I think this is true. This was true with my mother. My mother, the nuns in my mother's high school and the nuns in my mother's college made their students' success their ambition. There's a selflessness there, which I don't think is talked about enough. Another thing that I could relate to, having been raised Catholic, was his comments about the terms of address, calling priests father, or calling nuns sister, or calling Christian brothers brother. It allowed for a close bond, but also created the distance of formality. Just the contradictions of the church in many ways. I would say the harmonious contradictions of the church, how they allowed for intimate but also formal interaction that was a very, very rife atmosphere for intellectual growth and spiritual growth. I can't recommend the book more. It was enlightening to me, as well as a joy to read. I had reservations going in. He cleared them up. He clarified. I can see the subtleties of his arguments about a topic that continues to be very relevant today. I would recommend that you don't get the Random House Bantam edition, that you get the edition published by David R. Godine Press in Boston. They originally published, Richard Rodriguez, this iconoclastic thinker, 41 years ago. Okay, they brought out this 40th anniversary edition with a preface by Philip Lopate, an impressive critic himself and thinker himself on both cinema and literature. Got to support iconoclastic thinkers. Richard Rodriguez is still alive. When this video comes out, he'll either be about to turn 79 or already 79. He should be celebrated. His book should be celebrated. Not only for its ideas, but for its beauty.